Hi, I'm Susan with ICANNWiki at ICANN 53 in Buenos Aires, and I'm here today with Paul Twomey. Paul, could you introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your history with ICANN?
So I'm Paul Twomey. I was the first chair of the Governmental Advisory Committee, and then I was CEO for a couple of terms.
Excellent.
And now I'm an active, independent participant.
Well, thank you both for your service in those capacities and for remaining within the community. Appreciate it. So I was wondering whether you might be able to explain a little bit about the issues you're following here at ICANN 53. What are those issues?
Well, I'm mostly focusing on the accountability review process, which I've been a member of the CCWG, which is famous in ICANN for being a four-letter acronym, not a three-letter acronym, where most things in ICANN are three-letter acronyms. And then also the IANA transition stuff. I think in many respects that's been somewhat, dare I say, inevitable. I look at what's come for the IANA transition proposals. Potentially a little bit the organisational aspects have got some perhaps some differences than I expected, but it's not totally unlike what I thought the community might come up with. The thing I would just be hopeful about is that the community's come up with a structure. Often the community discussion, especially around the IANA, where it has various parties. The IANA has over 2,000 tables within it, only one of which is a top-level domain, is a name table. You've got the IP addressing allocation tables, and most of it is protocol parameters for the IETF. In all of those discussions, there's always different parties, different views, different historical perspectives on things like the name IANA and intellectual property, who owns it, who doesn't, those sorts of things that go on. So they always end up with some sort of structural, and we should have a structure like this or a structure like that. Mm-hmm. That's fine. The key thing, I think, is that it's actually operating very well. It's been operating very smoothly, and there are aspects of the operations that just require the sort of trusted community model that we've had for 30, 40 years. And I hope we don't try to break any of that. We don't inadvertently break any of that by having new structures. It's a little bit similar with the accountability process underway at the moment.
I wanted to ask about that. So for those who aren't necessarily close to the process, would you mind offering a few words on the relationship between the accountability work and the IANA stewardship work, because these are evolving in parallel, so it would be good to understand how they're related.
So you have to go back, if you go back to the beginning of, at least of ICANN, and with the IANA functions, you can certainly go back prior to that. The United States government has had foundational roles. With ICANN, it put in place a memorandum of understanding process that continued for a while, and then under my watch came to an end, and then there was the accountability review process that's been established since, which is more about accountability to the community. Mm-hmm. And I would say that quite a number of countries, a number of players, and particularly American corporations involved with the ICANN process, have over the years thought that they've got two bites of the cherry. I can go to ICANN and try to get what I want, and if I don't get that, I can go to the US government, and at least I can complain. Mm. And I think mostly in the US government context, the US government's role has been, certainly in the more recent 10 years or more, a little bit like your counsellor, sit there and go, yes, that's very sad, how about that? Why don't you just go back and talk to ICANN again? So there hasn't been very much US intervention at all. Mm. Now that the last instrument, the IANA contract is coming to an end, and this transition's been talked about, I think the community is going through another one of these cathartic, oh my God, the Americans are going, what do we got to do? Well, we've got to have real accountability. And real accountability often result, if you sort of tear it down, real accountability is, how can I ensure they do what I want? If they don't do what I want, then how do I? I'm exaggerating, but there's elements of that. Yeah. And so I think what's now going through now of empowering the supporting organisations and the ACs in certain circumstances is probably fine. And I think all the scenarios that I'm asking people, for instance, is being discussed here, the proposals of being able to completely spill the board and replace the board, and this is seen as an accountability mechanism. Well, I've got a couple of scenarios which I won't talk on camera about, but when I think about what's a scenario under which you're going to, or one, let's take one. I can imagine if somebody uncovered widespread corruption such as we've seen in other international sporting organisations recently, really widespread corruption sort of stuff. Okay, there's an example where, you would want to spill the blood. ICANN's got a pretty good financial accountability auditing process, etc. But there's an example, right? So there are some sort of extreme examples where I think that might work. Otherwise, I think the supporting organisation AC empowerment model is back reinforcing this culture of that we working together and we're accountable together as a community. I think I am a little concerned at the moment that we don't. In the spirit of figuring out who we got the scenario way out here somewhere that's really the thing that worries us, and therefore we come with all these sort of structural things, which at the heart of which is lack of trust, that we actually kill the goose that laid the golden egg. At the heart of this whole internet thing has been accountability, community engagement, support, coordination, cooperation. Let's not erode that too much in the spirit of what do we do if there's a disaster. And so I think I'm hopeful that the model that's been worked up by the CCWG now, and actually as we're talking, is being discussed in a large room over there.
Oh, okay.
I'm hoping that is more, best of both worlds, reinforcing the existing trust model, but giving us some instruments in case we end up with a disaster.
Well, maybe we can have a follow-up interview in Dublin about it, and we'll see what has happened since then. So it's really just it's a very real-time thing. It's something exceptional that I don't know if anybody's encountered a process like this, a multi-stakeholder process that will be vetted by a government, and I mean it's just all very, very new and fresh.
Well, the thing that strikes me recently was the British are celebrating 800 years of the Magna Carta.
Okay.
And even the Magna Carta itself is an illustration of how constitutional frameworks come out of political crisis and get reinterpreted later in different ways than they were to start with, blah, 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 blah. You take that constitutional thing for the United Kingdom, and it's hundreds and hundreds of years of sort of political incidents, and this accident and this thing happened, which results in, this is our constitution.
Right.
And, ICANN sort of goes through the same thing. It's much shortened. It's only 15 years. But it's the same, this disaster happened, or this particular thing happened, or I wasn't happy with that, therefore, and this constant review process, I think has allowed us really to develop up a constantly reforming and good constitutional framework for the multi-stakeholder. But it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It is exhausting.
Sure. I don't know how all of you guys do it. I mean, you have extraordinary capacity to really, and commitment and drive to really get something workable.
I think the community has that. I think the risk we have as a community in some respects is from outside we're seen to be constantly staring at our neighbours, constantly looking at this process while, there's real work going on. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I actually just have one last question for you. It's kind of out of left field, but if you had to pick one acronym in ICANN, regardless of the affiliation with the acronym, but what's your favorite acronym and why?
The Governmental Advisory Committee, GAC.
GAC.
Because the middle word's advisory.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
And Joe Sims had a conversation with me at one of the pre-meetings in Singapore before ICANN was formed. And I don't know how many people, Joe and I know the story, but nobody else do. Joe comes up to me, he was then working for John Postel to help think about how this might emerge. And he comes to me, and I was at the time the head of the Australian National Office Information Economy. And he says, so do you think we should have a governmental committee? And I thought for about 30 seconds and said, yeah, it's probably not a bad idea, but for heaven's sakes, don't give them the power to tell you to do anything. Just make them advisory. And 3 months later, there was this thing called this Governmental Advisory Committee, and I was always amused by that, but yeah.
Excellent. And now we have a multi-stakeholder model. Maybe it's because of that A. Thank you.
Now it's sort of advisory with a capital A, and a lot of I think probably appropriate emphasis upon the role of governments in public policy.
Absolutely.
But still.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time, Paul. I appreciate it.
Good.